Welcome. Going to make a little tiny journal out of this Jello box, and I'm going to start by opening along the side edge. I do that so that I can get a nice clean folded edge when I make the journal cover. You'll see what I mean here in just a second. First thing I'm going to do is trim the edges just a little bit, not too much. I don't want a lot of bulk. The only part that I'm going to leave long is the two middle flaps. I'll do that so that my spine is a little bit reinforced in the top and bottom. That way, if I want to add a charm or something heavier that will dangle off the spine, it'll be a little more sturdy. Now that it's all trimmed, I can go ahead and glue the edges down. I'm going to be sewing around the edges of this, so it doesn't need to be super secure. I can use just a little scrapbooking glue tape to tape the edges of this. It just needs to hold it down enough to last until I get it to the sewing machine. Now the edges are nice and smooth, and we're ready for the next step. You can see how this is going to make just the perfect sized miniature journal cover. The problem with reusing these little boxes can be that the design shows through. If I were to put a clear fabric or a thin fabric over the top, or even just white cotton like this, you can see the design through it. So this next step is going to be optional depending on what you're planning on doing. If you want to attach the fabrics directly to the Jello box or the cereal box or whatever you're using, then I would suggest you use some white gesso to kind of brush over the top of it so that those colors aren't so bold and popping through. When I use my gesso, I never use a paintbrush. I put it on with my finger every single time. I've never been good with a paintbrush, and I've found that when I apply gesso with my fingers, it's just a lot smoother finish. I'll do this whether I'm working in my art journal or something like this. I am going to put 2 coats on, so I'm going to dry this quickly so it goes a little faster. Remember, this is an optional step. If you are going to put a lining on your fabric, then you don't need this gesso coverage. I'm actually going to be applying my fabrics to a book page, which I'll then glue onto the Jello box itself, so nothing is going to show through. But I did want to do this step just in case you wanted to sew the fabric straight onto your box. Now comes the fun part, picking out the fabrics. When I'm hand piecing a fabric journal cover, I will always start with one piece of fabric that just appeals to me that particular day, and in this case it was the piece in the middle with the golds and the purples and the blues. So I'll just go through my stash and kind of throw things in a pile on the table until I get some kind of mixture of colors that looks interesting, and then I'll start piecing it together from there. A little stash building tip for you. I have found some of the most beautiful fabrics by going to Goodwill, thrift stores, and looking in the shower curtain section. And there are some great ones that are hidden in there. You can get yards for just a few bucks, and you can get some really nice fabrics. I'm going to apply my fabrics to a piece of book page. It makes it easier to glue it onto the box. So the first thing I'm going to do is just measure a page to just slightly bigger than the Jello box. This is just going to give me a guideline for where to place my fabrics, and I'll sew them directly onto this piece of paper. Now, honestly, this is the step that takes me the most amount of time. You're going to want to play around with your pieces, trim them as needed, get them exactly how you want them. A little tip if you're absent-minded like me, I will be playing around with these combinations of color, and sometimes I'll have something that is really great, and then I'll think, oh, but what if I changed it and added this to it? And then suddenly I can't remember the really great combination that I just had. My advice to you, if you find a combination that you think you're going to really like, snap a picture with your cell phone, and then you can rearrange all you want and go back to the way it was when you liked it the first time. Once you have the pieces where you think you're going to want them, go ahead and tack them down. Doesn't have to be permanent, doesn't have to be a lot of glue, just a tiny little bit to keep it in place while you take it over to the sewing machine. Also, this is another good time to take a picture with your cell phone, because even when I thought I had things tacked in place, they still seem to move around by the time I get to my sewing machine. And sometimes I can never get it pieced together just how I had it before. And I can't tell you how many times having that picture on my cell phone has saved my sanity. Here's another little tip for you. This coppery ribbon that I'm playing with right here, I bought this at, I think it was Michael's, might even have been Walmart, actually, at the end of the holiday season. It was a 9-yard spool of Christmas ribbon. It was the wired kind. Anyway, I took out the wires, which is super easy to do, and this ribbon actually had an underlayer to it, so I separated the 2 layers, which again is super easy to do. So I ended up with 2 different kinds of ribbon, 9 yards each. Then I took each strip and I tore them into 1-inch strips. I think the ribbon was on clearance for $1.50, and I ended up getting so much out of it. All right, so I'm just about ready to take this to the sewing machine and sew around the edges of my first layer, attaching the fabric to the paper. Of course, you can also just sew it straight onto the Jello box. Before I sew it, though, I am going to trim up the edges a little bit, only because I am not a seamstress, and no matter how hard I try, I always sew a crooked line. But at least this way, it makes it a little bit easier for me to sew on the straight and narrow. Once you've got that base layer attached, then you can go ahead and start adding your second layer of smaller pieces. This is a great time to look at that center focus piece of fabric that you have and try and figure out what your accent color is going to be that you want to have pop in throughout your journal. And for this one, I'm choosing greens and purples. I really liked this stringy, feathery piece of fabric that I had. I love how the purple jumps out, but I just couldn't get it to piece right. As you'll see, by the time I got to the actual sewing machine, I ended up changing my mind altogether and putting something different at the bottom. Not to worry though, because those little pieces are going to become tabs or embellishments or something. I guarantee you they will appear in this journal somewhere. So, as you'll see in a second, right there, it's green. Did you catch it? Now at this point, you can go ahead and glue your fabric cover onto the Jello box if you'd like, but I would suggest holding off because you may want to give yourself some binding options. By leaving the fabric off for now, you can sew the signatures directly onto the Jello box and then cover it with the fabric and end up with what we call a hidden spine. Or you can glue the fabric onto the box now and go ahead and sew the signatures into the box so that the spine shows. Or there is another way of doing a hidden spine binding, which you can find in one of my previous videos, that allows you to create a hidden spine even if you've already covered up the box. For this particular one, I'm not going to glue it down just yet because I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do and I want to keep my options open. Well, that's the end of this process video. I will make a couple others as I go along in the process of making this journal. Hopefully you'll journal along with me. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.